I graduated high school in 1941, and I was very active in school. I played guard in basketball on the championship team of that year. We won the Ohio Valley Conference championship, beat my wife's own school, who had 1,000 students, and we were only down to about 400. We won 21 straight games, undefeated. First time in the history of Warwood High School that was ever achieved. It hasn't been achieved since either. So I didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated. I thought about, and my parents talked about medicine. That sort of stuck with me. I thought about that. But then my parents had opened up a restaurant, and they didn't know anything about the restaurant business. I did, having worked in the hotels in Brooklyn and in Jersey and elsewhere. So I felt a certain responsibility that I should stay and help. So I stayed out for a whole year, worked with them, helped them organize their restaurant called the Palm Gardens in a beautiful place, which my dad had completely renovated. And finally, I made my decision at the end of 1 year that I really would go to school. And I enrolled, and my dad took me, he drove me down to Morgantown. And here I was, I'd been traveling all over the country on my own, Brooklyn, Jersey City, Whitesville, West Virginia, but he insisted on coming with me. So he took me to Morgantown, to the University of West Virginia, and he stayed with me 2 days. And it's one of the most interesting times that I had in a conversation with my dad on the bus. I was so taken with this man that I never knew before. I didn't know my dad before I came to this country. That's why we came. But I got to know him so well, and it began with that trip. And I began to admire him so much for all the things that he had done in the field of desegregating his restaurant, desegregating the union, coal miners' unions. And he was just, I felt so close to him at this point. So we went to lunch, and he told me to go ahead and go through my registration, and I did. It was very easy. It was all paid for in advance. And then he came back and he says, "Louis, I have to go back, but let me take you up to where you're going to be staying at the dormitory." So he took me there, and there I met two friends of mine, lifelong friends, Walter and Paul, and Walter and Arthur Rybeck, two Jewish people, young men who were in school like me. And I introduced my father to them. And my dad smiled and very happy to meet him. So then he went down and got on the bus, but before he left to go back to Wheaton, he said to me, "Tell me their name again." I said, "Rybeck." And my dad's mouth opened this way. Rybeck. I knew their father, Mr. Rybeck, because Mr. Rybeck was the general manager of a very large store in Wheeling that sold furniture. So when we came here in 1927, he bought all his furniture. He had Mr. Rybeck come in and decide what he should have, and refurbish that house that we lived in. Now, these two people have always been very close to me. Walter's still here. He lives out in Silver Spring at Riderwood with his wife Erica, who's very seriously ill, and I pray for her every night. And Arthur passed away, a dentist, but a true, I call him a Renaissance man in my book. He was a philanthropist. He was a traveler of the world. He invented instruments in dentistry, bought a farm and built a house on it, and there he provided free dental aid to anybody who would come. And it's still going on by his daughter Blanche. So that was my first year at college with these two people, these close friends of mine. And that's when I decided to go into pre-medicine. So I met Dr. Darby. Dr. Darby was the head of the pre-medical staff at WVU. And he gave a speech one day, and he says, you know, young people, medicine is not only a science. Do not forget, it's also an art. That stayed with me. That made a very deep impression on me. Well, I stayed in pre-medicine that year, and then I would come home and see my parents occasionally. And on one particular occasion, a doctor friend of ours, who took care of us, Dr. Lyons, originally from Canada, would take me with him on the tour occasionally when he visited homes. And he introduced me as his assistant. I felt so good about that. But then, you know, I was quite satisfied. Well, the time came that I was to be drafted in the Army. And my dad said to us, Elias, that's my name, comes from Elijah. You got a younger brother, Tom, whose name was really Athanasius. And be that as it may, we were both born on the same day, same month, 2 years apart. So I want you to stay together. You're going to be leaving together, and he pointed his finger at me when he said that. You stay together, you are leaving together, but I want you to come back together. And you take care of your little brother. Well, my little brother was more street savvy than I was, even though it was only 2 years apart. But that was the restriction imposed on us. So we went to Fort Hays, Ohio. I had previously been taking the Air Cadet examinations as an officer at the University of West Virginia, and I passed them, and I went down to Charleston to be sworn in with my other friends to go to Air Cadet training. And I was told when I got there that he said to me, this major, where were you born? I said, born in Greece. How long have you been a citizen? Well, I had to say since 1938, because my dad had lost his papers, citizenship papers, to no fault of his own. There was awful people who did things to him. That's another story. And so I said, it was 1938. Well, he says, you know, to be an officer's candidate school, you have to be, you have to have been a citizen for 10 years. So I was several years short. So I was turned down. He said to me, your papers will stay in Cincinnati at the regional office. So when you finish your basic training, you tell your commander this story, that you are qualified to go to Air Cadet training, and he cannot stop you from doing it. He has to let you go. So I was very happy with that. I came back. My parents were very happy that I wasn't going. And so I came back, and Tom and I were drafted together, went to Columbus, Ohio, and I went to the commandant there, not the commandant, the adjutant, and said to him, we're brothers, we're immigrants, we were born the same day, same month, we've been very close, and we want to stay together. And very angrily, he looked up at me and says, what are you talking about? Haven't you heard about the Sullivan brothers? Of course, we all had 5 Sullivan brothers who went down on the ship. We don't do that sort of thing anymore. Now get out of here. So we proceeded to leave. And right before I closed the door, I looked back at him and said, well, sir, could you at least put in the record that we asked for it? he still waved me away. Within 2 weeks later, Tom and I are on the same troop train going to California. And there we became members of the 125th AAA Gun Battalion. We trained there in Southern California and on the Mojave Desert. And we became very quite expertise in our work. Since I was a medical student, pre-medical student, they made me into a combat medic. And I was assigned to Battery A, Able Battery, of the 125th AAA Gun Battalion Mobile. Our guns were 90 millimeter guns, the heaviest guns for either anti-tank or anti-aircraft operations. So we trained both in California and on the Mojave Desert. And one day, we were told that we were going to leave. I thought we were going somewhere else, maybe overseas. No, we were sent down to Louisiana and took part in the Red and Blue Army maneuvers of that day, which were very famous. It's a kind of a training expertise. Well, we participated. We were on the side of the Blue Army, but very shortly thereafter, we were defeated. We were captured and put out of action, and we felt very bad about that. But we were at a very nice place there in Louisiana. It was very swampy territory, and we had orders never to sleep under a vehicle because it would sink, and it had happened to prior battalions who were in that training program. So it wasn't nice, but it was beautiful territory nonetheless. So we thought for certain now we were going to the Pacific. Why set us down there and be trained in that kind of warfare? So undoubtedly we were going to the Pacific. Well, that was not the case. We were transferred up to Massachusetts. And we were there, went training up in Massachusetts in the Cape Cod area. So we thought for sure the Pacific was out of the way. We were going to go to somewhere else. It could be Africa, because the fighting was going on in Africa. Well, we finally were told we were going to go across the Atlantic. Didn't know where. But we got onto the ship, great quarters. It was quite nice, great food. It was just a wonderful trip. And we were escorted by naval ships. And once we got far out, these naval ships that were escorting us to protect us against submarines left us, and we were on our own. And soon, a young man from Chicago, an Irishman, said, "Hey, this is the Isle of Man. We're home in Ireland." And we landed. We landed at East Liverpool, and that's where we disembarked and got onto trucks, etc., and drove down to the Channel coast of England in Kent. A beautiful place, Kent. And there we set up to do what? We didn't know. Well, the first secret weapon that Hitler had already been activated, and it was bombing England. This is after the first aerial bombing of England, which became early after the war. This is the second Blitz, I call it. But it was not only aircraft, it was also V-1 bombs, rocket bombs, that each carried about a ton or so of explosives. And they were like an airplane, but it was a robot flying over, and it was directed from Germany. They had the directions all set up within the robot, and it would release its bombs at an appropriate place. But I must correct that. It wasn't releasing his bombs. It would terminate flying and go into a dive with an awful, scary noise. And they attacked all of England, whether it was a military establishment or a non-military establishment, whether it was homes or cities, just like the aircraft had done during the first aerial strikes against England early in the war. Well, we shot a lot of those down. In fact, of all the battalions, there were 6 battalions who were strewn out along the Southampton coastal area, along the channel. And we knocked down my battalion, the 125th, with its 3 batteries, A, B, C, and D, 4 batteries, besides the headquarters battery, but that's where Tom was. He was in headquarters battery. He had it very nice, sleeping in houses and so forth. And we're out in the field sleeping in pup tents all this time. So I was very happy that happened. So we knocked down more of these V1s than any other battalion. And there is a plaque now standing up at north of Kent, close to, where is the famous place? Oh my goodness, I forget what it's called. It's a large city north of Kent. It's there, dedicated to the 125th for all that it did. So we thought originally when we went to Kent, we thought we were going to go and land on Omaha Beach. That's what we thought. But we were down there waiting to go, and we were told later to go back. And we went back to Kent and kept shooting down these aircraft, these V-bombs. So we did that for some time. Then we got a letter from Eisenhower commending us on how well we did. Personal letter from Eisenhower given by his adjutant, saying that we were outstanding, and he wanted us to know that we were not out of the war. In fact, what we were doing was very vital to the war, and not to feel that we had not seen actual combat in any other fashion, because you'll be going there very soon. And lo and behold, one day, we got march order, got new equipment, went back out to Southampton to land on the channel, to go across the channel, and that's where we did. We landed on Omaha Beach in the same boat with my brother. Well, we knew, we were told, I checked with Tom. He says, yeah, you know we're going. Tom says, yes, I know that, Lou. I hope we can get together on the same boat. I don't know what it's going to be. He says, well, they're going to split some of us up and put us on the same boats with others. It just happened that way, that when they split us up, some of the headquarters people was on my boat that we landed with. And there was no shooting going on anymore on Omaha Beach. The Germans had retreated. The infantry had advanced, but there was still fighting called in the so-called hedgerows. And when we landed, we heard the shooting going on in the hedgerows. So we thought we would go into that area. As we proceeded to move, but I want to tell you a little story. When we first landed, it was around late evening. So we all got out of our boats and took our equipment, and I went and found a place to sleep. I spread out my bag and took out my sleeping thing and slept there. And I was awakened early in the morning, and I heard somebody singing. So I raised my head out of my sleeping bag. I was hit in the face with like a fan or something. And I looked up, and there was this Frenchman 2 feet away from me, milking his cow and singing in French, and I knew it was French. I knew he was French. And I was hit in the face with this cow's tail. That was my first experience in Normandy, by this tail of the cow. And he said to me, "Bonjour, monsieur, bonjour, monsieur. Comment ça va?" I said, "Très bien." I knew some French. So he just kept milking away. Then, of course, the whistle rang that we were going to leave. So I packed up my material and proceeded to find a vehicle to get on. And as I looked back, and I still saw that little short Frenchman with a tammy, wore a tammy, milking that cow and singing. And that's a picture that I had of Normandy, France. So we proceeded to move, and we had no combat action whatever. We took a different route, we were told, but we had to be very careful because there were landmines still dug deep in the area. So we swiveled back and forth and finally proceeded forward northward. And then we took a right turn and headed toward Paris. Apparently that was safe there. And we liberated, my unit, my battalions liberated a town outside of Paris called Lire. And today there's a restaurant in Bethesda, Maryland, run by Frenchmen. And we go there very often, very good restaurant. And he was a young boy when that town was liberated. And we still go to that restaurant here in Bethesda. And that wonderful man, his name is Heron. And I told him the story, and then when we go there, we always shake hands and speak of that. And then we made a left turn and headed further northwestern, and we wound up in Cherbourg, on the coast of France. That was then a very vital port for the introduction of aid resources to fight with. We had to protect that. So we set up our guns there, and we did fire, and had some successes there. Then our vehicles, people in the motor pool, so-called, to join with the army of trucks that were being driven by blacks, by African Americans. I hate that word blacks. African Americans who were driving that equipment up the line. So many of our own people in the motor pool section did that activity while we were still firing away at the aircraft coming in. That didn't last too long, maybe 2-3 weeks at the most. And we had secured Cherbourg. Cherbourg was safe. So then we moved into Belgium. We went further north into Belgium. And I recall as we were driving, I didn't know where we were going. But then I looked out, I was in a truck with a few friends from Ohio, from Cleveland, Ohio. And I saw a kind of a hill in the distance, but there were no trees there at all. Like the trees had been all cut down. And there was a statue there. I couldn't make it out what it was. And I told my friends, "Did you see that?" I said, "Yeah, we see it. I don't know what it is." But there was some kind of a statue there. So as we proceeded further, I saw names of towns. And I realized that was the place where the British had defeated Napoleon at that battle. And there was a statue there of a lion. That's what it looked like. It was a lion, a statue there of a lion. So we kept going, and finally we got to our position in Belgium. We were amongst the forces that liberated Brussels, the capital of Belgium. And from there we went on to Antwerp in Belgium still, on the coast, which then had become the major port of entry for American and Allied supplies. And we stayed there, and we were very active there. Now we were hitting V1s and V2s. The second secret weapon appeared. And it was very hard to bring down because it went so fast. It was faster, but it would also drop down. The circuitry would be cut off automatically. It was predestined to cut off at certain places and at certain targets. And we did very well in Antwerp, however. We saved that town, that port of entry, and it was vital to the Allied cause. It was in the 60s. There was a very famous affair that happened in Belgium. The son of King Leopold, the Crown Prince of Belgium, had arranged for a great ceremony to be given in Antwerp on that occasion, for the saving of Antwerp. And our battalion was asked to send representatives there. Well, I could go. I was sick. I had a minor heart attack. I couldn't go, and I felt so bad about that. But some of my friends went. It was a great ceremony, and Leopold gave the son of Leopold gave a very great speech about that affair. And I understand, and I read, because it's written up, that he took the American flag himself and held it up, and he cried as he spoke about that day and how important it was to the safety of Antwerp. And we were, when we took Brussels, it was such an outpouring of support. People were throwing things out of their apartment buildings, fruit and stuff like that. And they were on the streets, tried to stop our trucks and shaking our hand because we had helped liberate Brussels. We and the British, of course, did that. So that was a very terrific time. Then we moved into Holland. And on one occasion, we were supposed to go in to move our position and go up a slight hill. We didn't know where we were going or why we were going. I found out later. It was that great battle that the British had organized with American support to take the bridge. A movie has been made, A Bridge Too Far. Take that bridge in Belgium, which would take us into Nijmegen in Germany and open the door for an American movement into Germany. Very major battle. We lost a lot of people, not I, but the people that served, Americans and Brits, were really defeated at that battle of Nijmegen. And we were supposed to be there, and then we were called back, so we returned to our position and did go there. I didn't know that the battle, what it was going to be about, where we were going, and then why we were suddenly turned back. There was an occasion when I was returning, my unit was returning from a position that we had heretofore retreated from. And there was a man coming down that road, a Belgian, we were in Belgium, bringing his mule. And I noticed that my colleagues who were ahead of me had moved over to the side of the road so he could go by with his mule. So I waited the same way, and as he approached me, I moved over to the side of the road, which put me at a little lower distance than he and his mule were. But the next thing I knew, I found myself lying on the ground. I shook my head, and I realized I'd been kicked in the head by that mule. So I looked forward, and this man was still walking away. Apparently he had no knowledge that it had been done, but I had a slight dent in my helmet. Fortunately, I had a helmet on. And I thought about that. Even though it was a mule, I was glad it was an Allied mule that did it, and not a German mule.
So after that, with you mentioned in your book, Battle of the Bulge, Birthday for Two Brothers. Can you tell me about that?
Oh,
about
yes.
The Battle of the
Bulge. That was December the 17th, and I had arranged for my brother and I to meet and have our customary celebration of a common birthday, December the 19th. He said, yes, fine, we'll do it, Lou. I said, well, I'll come into the headquarters battery and pretend I need to acquire more medical items for myself, and we can do it then. Well, that never happened, because the very following day, I would say about the 18th of December, we got march order, and we were going to move. Who knew where? No, we weren't told where or why or anything. And so we all got into our vehicles and proceeded to go, in my opinion, southwardly. And we went to some places that I recognized, like Malmedy, which I later learned was a place where many American and soldiers, as well prisoners, as well as medics, had been executed by the Germans. So I knew we were going southward. We never knew where we were. Our batteries and our individual guns were separated. There was no communication with the battery headquarters or with the battalion headquarters. Every gun and its assemblage of people were separated. So we have 4 gun batteries, and there's a gun, 90 millimeter gun in each battery. Well, we were by ourselves. And we stopped at a position when we were finally told that there had been a breakthrough in the southern Ardennes forest by massive German forces, infantry and tanks. And we were sent down there to take part in that action. We didn't know what village we were in, but it was in a very pretty little village with a stream running by it. And there was a very nice couple there, Belgian couple, and we had parked our gun right behind the house of that Belgian family, so we hid that way. And the road that was coming right in front of us was where we expected the tanks to come up. So we waited. Nothing had happened, and these people were very gentle. They would frequently ask for us to come and eat, but we said no. So we would give them our K rations or C rations, and they would warm them up and bring them to us. So we saw some action there, and we heard the guns from other batteries firing. We didn't know where our other batteries and other guns were. They were scattered. We subsequently found out, after this was all over with, that we were just north of the very famous Battle of Bastogne, which was a critical battle in the war. And we were attached to the Third Army in that context. We saw some action there, but it was very limited action, and we were quite surprised. And then we had no air support. There was nobody else around. We knew of no other people, other armed forces around us. We were by ourselves. And one day, it was Christmas Day, and it was a beautifully bright, sunny day, and I heard this huge roar. And I looked up from my sleeping bag. We were sleeping in pup tents. The snow on the ground, very heavy snow, very cold. But that day, Christmas Day, was a sunny day and warm day. The snow was still there. And I looked up and I saw a massive formation of aircraft, all American, B-17s, bombers, escorted by U.S. fighter aircraft. It literally filled the sky. I felt as if I could reach up and touch one, because they were flying very low. And they were dropping supplies, and they were also dropping bombs on very near Allied German forces, and we lost some planes. I saw some that crashed and went down. That was a liberating day. Within a day after, an American infantry unit pulled into our position. That's the first time we saw any other support for us during that whole time. And it was very nice. They were very nice to us, and they congratulated us for any action we took down there. We didn't lose anybody. We lost somebody earlier. Before we went down to that position, I have to go backwards a bit now, and I apologize for that. We had stopped at Liège, a beautiful city, large city in southern Belgium. And that's where we learned as to what the action were, what our mission was to be, and where we would go in Liège. Well, I constantly rode with my friends. I had no vehicle of my own. I rode with a group of people on the #1 gun. Good friends of mine, all of them. And I would sit on top of the armed tractor that pulled the gun, because we were a very mobile outfit. We could do 35 miles an hour by tractor, which is a tractor very heavily armed. And so I would go with these people. Whenever we had to move, I would go with them. They were my friends from Ohio and West Virginia. So I couldn't find them. So I began searching. I didn't know where they were. We were lined up at that point to cross the Meuse River, which is a pontoon bridge, presumably built by American forces, because there was no reason to have a bridge there. So as I went down to look for where they were, where my friends were, and where my brother had been, I saw that there were no vehicles, minor, small vehicles. They apparently had already crossed the Meuse, so I knew Tom was safe. So I was looking for the #1 gun. The guns were all lined up in order. And I didn't see the #1 gun. I couldn't see it. When I got down very close, there was an enormous explosion. An enormous explosion. And all this ammunition that was carried in this vehicle was 90 millimeter and ammunition, canned ammunition, and 50 caliber machine gun ammunition. They were flying all over. And I was maybe 50 or 60 or 70 feet close, so I dropped to the floor. But I didn't know what unit had been hit. Was it a battery? Was it the #1 gun? Then I heard a voice from behind me. And the man said, "That's my gun." And I looked over, and it's the commander of A battery, Captain Ide. And he was hiding some 60 feet away down by the Meuse River behind a cement embankment. And I was out there in the middle of all this. So I realized when he said, that's my gun, that's my tank, I realized it was a battery, my battery. But there was no #1 gun anymore. That was the gun that was hit. And all of my friends, 11 of them, were killed in that action. That was the first major action where we lost anybody. We lost some people elsewhere, in England and Belgium and in Holland. But at that time, that was the time that we lost all these men. So what did I do? I began, as I was trained in the Mojave Desert, to lie prostrate on the ground and crawl with your hands in these training patterns that we had. That's what I did. I began crawling, keeping my head down, getting closer and closer. And finally, I got within, I would say 15 feet, because the ammunition was still going off. Finally, it seemed to subside. And I got very close, and I saw what was there. And I got a picture of it, and it'll be in my book. And I began trying to find particularly my good friend Earl Zurcher. We were so close. I began looking for it, and there was nobody there. There were just pieces of people all over. So next thing I know, a first lieutenant comes running down toward me. He was our gunnery officer. And he came toward me. He said, "Lou, what's happening?" I said, "Well, there you are, sir. It's right here." So we began looking together to see if we could find anybody. Well, 5 minutes later, that Captain I that's sitting back safely guarding himself 50, 60 feet away, he comes over and he says to the lieutenant, "Steve, how could you have done all this?" And Steve looked at him in the eyes and he said, "Well, sir, somebody had to do it." And he walked away from that guy. Just hated him. Well, next thing, of course, we had to cross the bridge. We didn't have a number one gun anymore, so we crossed what we had. We crossed the bridge, and then I found out after we crossed the bridge, crossed the Meuse, that I had been hurt. Both of my elbows, I realized that both of my elbows were bloodied. I went to, my arms felt wet, even through the heavy coating. So being a medic, I saw what it was, and they were just bleeding. So I just took care of myself. I didn't go into headquarters. I didn't know where headquarters battery was with the medical aid station. I took care of myself. That was always the case. It had nothing to do with that medical unit detachment and headquarters. They didn't care. They were safe. And, they were in good shape. But they never came around to say, "How are you doing?" or anything like that. At least not to me, in a battery. So I just took care of I bandaged myself up, just the way I got hit in Belgium before, in northern Belgium. And I had shrapnel in my back. And my friend Earl Zurcher, I said, "Earl," I gave him my hemostat. He says, "See if you can get it." It wasn't very deep, so he was able to pull it out. Then I took some sulfur drug, and I had him pour it on me. And then he wrapped my shoulder, and that was it. I didn't go to the medical aid station and tell him I was wounded. I mean, I just took my medic. I take care of myself, and I take care of my guys. I had 150, 170 people in that battery that I had to look after. So that was a bad moment in my life, to see losing those people. And even to this day, they're the heroes that I live with. I had the opportunity to come back and live a normal life, but not they. So we crossed the bridge, went down, engaged in southern Belgium, and then we were all through. And when the campaign was ending, the aircraft came over, as I told you. We went north, back into Belgium. And we stopped at a particular place and saw some action there. And then from there, we went into Holland. And one day I went in for medical supplies. And there was a good friend of mine. He was a tech sergeant. He had 3 stripes and 2 stripes below him. And he was in charge of personnel matters. And he said to me, "Lou, that's wonderful what you did." I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" He was an Italian boy from New York somewhere. "What you did down there?" I said, what do you mean? "Well, that's my job." "Oh, no. Did you know about the medal?" I said, "No, I haven't heard anything about a medal." I didn't hear anything about a medal. He says, "Well, you're getting a medal." for heroism, he said. What? These are my friends, for crying out loud. But you know what's the saddest part of this whole thing? Captain Ide, the guy that was hiding behind there and did nothing, he's put himself in for a medal, for the same medal. I was aghast at that. And I've written about this extensively. He was aghast at that. Whereas this first lieutenant who came down and really helped me and told Ide off to his face, he was not put in for it. And I tried after the war was over. I got in touch with his daughters who lived in Virginia, and I said, I'd like to take this up with the Defense Department. I'll do whatever I can to get your dad given that medal. It's called the Soldier's Medal. It's right next to the Bronze Star. I have the Bronze Star and the Soldier's Medal. I said, I want to do this. But she said, well, we don't have, the man had died by then, and we don't have that information, but we'll try and get it for you. My brother has it, she said. They never got back to me. So I really was never able to do anything, but I felt so bad that Lieutenant Steve, what's his last name, I forget, was not given that award. So we then, as I say, we returned, and I found out about that. And then on an open field in Belgium, there was a big parade. The entire battalion was there, and Major General Armstrong was there. He decorated me and Captain Ide. And Captain Ide brought a sergeant with him from Pennsylvania, forget his name. He got a decoration. And I got a picture of it. But I was so angry at that. Well, from there, we went back into Holland. Well, this was over. The Battle of the Bulge was over. It's the worst battle of the war, the largest battle of the war, said Churchill. And we moved back into Holland. No, we went to France, to Metz, France, and we guarded German prisoners of war. And I got to learn a little German from them. Some of the prisoners were good, some of them were very mean toward their Hungarian prisoners, who were their allies. Well, after that, the war was over. We were still in Holland. And it happened that one day I met a young lady. So I didn't go on leave like many of my friends went to Paris and Brussels. I went to Luxembourg one time. So I went into Roosendaal, the city close to where we were still billeted, and I met this young lady very casually. She spoke French and English, and she knew all about our mission. And I wondered about that, why she would. But she invited me at a subsequent meeting. She invited me. I'd go into Roosendaal. I didn't stay away. I didn't go on leave. I would spend maybe a few hours away to go into town and come right back. So I met her again, and she invited me to her home. And I met her parents and her entire family. And her mother reminded me of my mother, because she wore her hair in a bun, as my mom did. The family was a wonderful family, Van de Ven, Mr. and Mrs. Antoine Van de Ven. And they had a large family. And I became very attached to them, and they attached to me. I even went to their Catholic church and had communion, even though I was a Greek Orthodox. I mean, I felt a priest is a priest. I don't care. He's a minister is a minister. Endowed by God to be, so I'm very liberal in that respect. And I loved them, and they loved me. And I stayed with them. I even slept a couple of times there. I met the whole family. But there was one story that was very sad. They had their eldest son was captured and executed by the Nazis. His name was Gerard. So I never met Gerard. I met everybody else except Gerard. And I found out that whole story, what happened to Gerard. I even tried to get our commanding officer to look into it, find out where was this young boy. I knew that he'd been executed, and the family had found out about it. 2 years ago, when I celebrated my 90th birthday, I think it was, yeah. I was born in 22. We had a big affair here. And all of a sudden, Carla, their daughter, is in New Jersey visiting her son. Now, we knew Carla from years before. She had come here with her husband, now a widow. And we had gone, when I was with NATO, the last years of my job at the department, I took Lula with me. She got a diplomatic passport, by the way. And we went to Brussels and to Antwerp, and we met the whole family. So she knew them. And so I found out that I knew about Gerard. So when Carla came to my reception here in Bethesda with her son, who's living up in New Jersey now, whom I helped get an extension to stay at the University of Illinois and get his master's degree. When I was still working, she called me very urgently. They're going to send him out, and he wants to go for a master's degree. So I got on the phone and talked to somebody up there. Look, this family is very important. They saved Jews and helped them get into the underground. They saved American and British and Canadian pilots and got them into the underground. Mr. Van de Ven was head of the underground in southern Holland. And Christine was his right-hand person. So when Carla came in with her son, Rudy, it was a very emotional thing for her when she told me the full story of what Gerard did. I won't go into the details, but I found out how he himself became a hero, but he was executed. And now I paid my homage to that family because our son Jeffrey is not Jeffrey Lou Sarris. He is Jeffrey Gerard Sarris. That's how close we are. I virtually felt that I was part of their family. I have a chapter on that in my book called Personal and Endearing Times of Peace Under War. Yes, after guarding those prisoners in Metz, which was our last mission, we came home. I came home first. I had more points because I was wounded twice. Tom did not. He had to wait. So I got home right about around Christmas time. And it was a big affair in the house. It was overwhelming, and everybody was crying and wondering, why didn't you come home with Tom? And I had to explain to him why. I was forced to come back before. Those were the regulations. And so I decided I had to make a decision. I saw that my parents were older. The restaurant was not doing as well as it was. So I had to make a decision. Where to go back? Do I go back to WVU? I decided not. I decided to stay close to them, get to know them again, especially get to know my youngest sister, Francesca, who I did not know. She grew up while I was away, either working or in college or during the war. So I stayed home, slept there, but I commuted to a local college, Bethany College, very good Bethany, private school near Wheeling. I commuted there. And I began to have second thoughts about medicine. So I took some humanities courses along with one particular course that I got a D in West Virginia, before the war, organic chemistry, which is a very hard course. I got a D in it, so I took it at Bethany College and I made a C+, and that was quite good for me. But I took some humanities courses. So in the second semester, I finally decided that I should go back to WVU. So I did. But I would come home on weekends and see my parents. And my other brothers were getting ready for college, but they were also helping Dad out and Mother. Mother was no longer involved in the restaurant, but Dad was. So I would come back on weekends and help. But at West Virginia, I finally decided that the humanities were really what I wanted to do. So I took all kind of courses. Oh my goodness. I read about Latin America. I read about Southeastern Europe. And when I came to back home, I was retired honorably, and the ceremony was held at Fort Meade. And I came into Washington to get the train to come home. I was so amazed by Washington, not because of all its memorabilia there, but the fact that I saw African American people dressed well and so forth, unlike when I was a kid back home, which I had many friends who were African Americans and still have to this day. I have a great feeling about these people. And I was surprised at this. I never saw it before. And then I heard people talking in foreign languages in Washington. That wasn't permitted when I was a kid. You didn't dare to speak Greek as a kid during this period of transformation, because you would be insulting, and the other people the American people, we call them in Greek Amerikani. They would say something to you about it. So we didn't speak outside of our house. We didn't speak English, except with my friends, my boyfriends. Yeah, I had no girlfriends. My boyfriends, we would speak English as best we could. So I was very impressed by that, and I thought, gee, I love this place. So I made the decision in Morgantown when I finished and got my bachelor's and master's degree there, that I would come to Washington and do my doctoral studies. And that's why I came in 1949. I liked Washington so much that I constantly had thought about coming here to do my doctoral studies. Well, I had a great professor, Professor Benjamin Keene, who taught me much about diplomatic history. And I learned a lot. Oh boy. I was interested in international relations at this point. And being a Greek immigrant and having born abroad, etc., I regarded myself as part of this international relations context, within that international relations context. So I mentioned this to Dr. Keene, that I wanted to get my doctorate. And I felt like going up to D.C. Well, what does this man do? This kind gentleman from Yale graduate. He said to me, I have a friend who teaches international relations at George Washington University. And I will write him a letter and send him a list of your credentials, your grades, etc., and I know he'll love to have you. I was amazed at Dr. Keene doing this. Dr. Keene was a student of perhaps the most famous diplomatic historian of the past, Samuel Flagg, Wave of the Flag, Bemis at Yale, whom he studied under. That's how important Dr. Benjamin Keene was. So I came to Washington. And I immediately reported to Dr. Richards' office. And he said to me, I'm glad to see you. I heard from Dr. Keene. And he said, I got your credentials here. Now you just go on and get registered. Pick whatever course you want. And you can leave your bags right here and pick them up when you get back. I couldn't have imagined such a situation before me. Such kind people. One who didn't know me from Adam except he got the letter from this friend of his. So I went and I registered.